Well, for more on this, we're now joined by Richard Calland, who's a law professor and political commentator. He's with the University of Cape Town, and he joins us now. Richard Calland, great to talk to you. It's been a while.
Hello, Peter. Very good to talk to you too.
Great. So, an important week for South Africa's judiciary. The top judge in the country will be selected. Let's talk a little bit about this process this time around. It has been quite different, hasn't it? And is this a good thing?
Yeah, this is unique. On previous occasions, most notably in 2011, when Mogoeng was interviewed, he was the only nominee of the president at that point. President Zuma had made it very clear that he wanted to appoint Mogoeng, and really the JSC was going through a little bit of a formality. They were certainly testing him, and it was a very testy interview. If you think back to 2011, it went on for a day and a half. You had the Deputy Chief Justice, Dikgang Moseneke, who had been overlooked once again for the position of Chief Justice in the chair, and there was a lot of electricity in the room. These interviews this week will be very different. I think that in general, there will be calm, there will be a recognition that these are four extremely eminent and extremely expert, well-qualified candidates. Indeed, I think it speaks volumes of the quality of South African judiciary and the strength of that arm of government, that there is such quality in these candidates. And so I welcome the fact that there is this transparent process. It's not strictly necessary, the Constitution doesn't require it, but the practice has emerged over the last 20 years that the JSC will conduct some kind of interview before the President makes his final choice, yes.
And I suppose that the President started off with public nominations, gives it a bit more as well, that the people of South Africa's voice is heard, and that the judiciary is strengthened by a process such as this.
Well, that's right. And in a way, this is Ramaphosa's approach to life and to decision-making at its best and most apt. You know, he's often criticized for being over-consultative, not decisive enough, not bold enough. But I think when it comes to this appointment, I think this makes a lot of sense to have gone through this process of carefully sifting through a bigger long list of candidates, narrowing it down to these four extremely able candidates, and then giving the JSC, which includes politicians, elected representatives, the opportunity to pose questions in front of the cameras, in front of the public eye, to assess the quality of the four, to really determine which of them has that sort of magic combination of independence, constitutional commitment, jurisprudential expertise and track record, but also the leadership and even managerial administrative abilities, because this is a leadership position. And during the era of Mogoeng, I think we all learned a lot about that aspect of the job. It's not just about being a good jurist, it's not just about being a good leader of and chair of the Constitutional Court, the apex court. It's about leading the branch of government, particularly during politically difficult times. And we know the judiciary has been pushed into the front line of politics many times over the last few years. And Mogoeng, to his very great credit, stood up to the independent role required of him as leader of the judicial branch. And of course, whoever succeeds him now of these four candidates will have to do the same. And that, I think, is one of the criteria that the JSC will be looking to test and to make sure they're comfortable with.
All right, we'll talk a little bit more about the qualities just now. A curious thing that's being debated now is this whole thing of age, and that you appoint someone who might be retiring quite soon. What's your take on that?
Look, it's an important point, Peter. I think that certainty and long-term planning is important. In any organisation, if you think about it, it's in general better to appoint someone who's going to be there for 10 years rather than, say, 1 or 2 years, because then you have to go through the rigmarole of this process of appointing someone new. Of course, the Deputy Chief Justice there is in some respects the front runner, simply because Raymond Zondo, is the Deputy Chief Justice. But of course, of the four, thanks to his role as the chair of the State Capture Commission, he is also now, unfortunately for him perhaps, the most controversial candidate. And I suspect that the fireworks, if there are to be fireworks the rest of this week, will probably come during his interview from some parts of the JSC. That's unfortunate for him because he's got a very, I think now, established and steady record as a jurist and as a political leader. Earlier in his career, he wasn't well regarded for his management of cases as a judge, for his administrative abilities, but I think that he's proved his mettle now, arguably as the chair of the State Capture Commission. He's certainly run a very complex process there, has he not? And he's certainly proved, I think, time and again in the public eye, that he really is a strong character who has an independent core that I think is very, very important for this job. But if Ramaphosa, or indeed the JSC, want to find a way of avoiding recommending or appointing Raymond Zondo, then I think the point you've made will come into play, which is to simply say, well, he would only be there for a couple of years, and it would be better to appoint one of the other candidates, Lambo or Maya, who could have a much longer term of 7 to 10 years. Of course, the downside of them, and what is said against them, is they're not currently members of the Constitutional Court. Right. And there is something of a convention that the Chief Justice should be appointed from the current membership of the court. I don't think that's certainly not a rule, it's merely a convention, and I think it would be more than acceptable for the President to depart from that convention if he thought, having consulted and listened to the JSC and taken regard of the interviews that will take place this week, if he then concludes, well, actually, one of those two other candidates, Maya or Glambo, are better suited to this role of Chief Justice.
All right. The Constitutional Court is an enormously important place, and so as much as we'd like to think that these are all independent institutions, there must be an element of politics involved here. And I wonder, especially when we look at the United States, I wonder if Cyril Ramaphosa maybe has already made up his mind, and that all that this candidate has to do is to get through the week unscathed.
Yes, interesting question. I'm not sure about that, actually. I tend to think that isn't the case, that Ramaphosa has an open mind here, because I think he will see the advantages of all of these four candidates, actually. Each of them brings something very unique and specific to the table, which would, I think, render them a very good appointment. I think he is genuinely, and as I understand it, having talked to people close to him, he's genuinely open-minded about this. He's interested to really think carefully about this, and that's why this process has taken a little longer than perhaps it should have done to unfold. After all, the previous Chief Justice retired at the end of October. That date was well known, and it's not ideal that there should be this gap in the leadership of the court, especially when Peter, the deputy, has been obviously very, very distracted in concluding his state capture report. But on your point in relation to politics, you're absolutely right, of course. This is a political role in the sense that the court is often drawn into issues of politics. We know that. It's happened time and again in the last 10 years. But also, we know that the branch of government is political. It has a budget, it's part of the state, it has to argue for resources, and it has to ensure that it has sufficient administrative independence from the rest of government. And of course, there have been real flashpoint moments in the last 10 years. I think it was in 2015 when the Zuma administration was really trying to intimidate the judiciary. It was very unhappy with the way in which the judiciary was standing up to Zuma. And there was a famous meeting that Zuma called with some of his lieutenants in government, a sort of tenor-side meeting with the top brass of government and the ANC on the one side, and the top brass of the ANC, of the judiciary on the other side. And that was an important moment where Mogoeng looked them in the eye and said, "We will not be intimidated."
All right, so, the Constitutional Court will have a Chief Justice, but in reality, one man doesn't make all the decisions. In real terms, really, it's a nice position to have, but is it a position that you're able to influence significantly, I wonder?
No, it has huge influence. I think your point is that in terms of the Constitutional Court, at least, this is one amongst 11. But as the head of the judicial branch of government, as well as being the head of the Constitutional Court, you do wield a huge amount of power and authority. And I remember when preparing a book in 2013, ahead of 2013, interviewing the then Chief Justice, Sandile Ngobo. And he presented to me I think, 6-page document listing all of the responsibilities and powers and authority that the Chief Justice has. He prepared that document, by the way, in order to make the argument that the administrative centre of the judiciary should be separate from the rest of government. And indeed, he achieved that. The Office of the Chief Justice is a separate part of government now, with its own separate budget, a form of administrative independence that I think was a tremendous success by Ngobo. And the point there, I think, Peter, is that this is a job with huge responsibilities and power. The chairing of the Constitutional Court is but one part of it, a very important part of course, because that court has to function well. And indeed, one of the criticisms of Mogoeng was that he didn't do a particularly brilliant job at managing that court. You've got 10 powerful intellects to manage there. You've got to find a way, as Chaskelson did, for example, in the early days of the Constitutional Court, of finding unity and unanimity where possible, in order to give the court as much authority as possible. That's not to say you must always have unanimity, but you shouldn't have unnecessary or needless division between different parts of the court. And we've noted in recent years that the court has become more divided. There have been more majority-minority decisions. And of course, the other weakness of the Mogoeng period was the number of acting judges that often were sitting on the court. Sometimes 4, 5 members of the court were acting. And that was a failure of administration in a sense. And I think one of the things the JSC will be looking for, I hope this week, is to ensure that their recommendation to the President is taking account of this important administrative responsibility, that the next Chief Justice is somebody who will manage the court in an extremely effective and efficient way, as well as being a jurist of renown. Now, luckily, all 4 of these judges are highly respected for their independence, their constitutional commitment, their jurisprudential philosophy. I don't think there are any difficulties there. Perhaps the real distinguishing feature is who will be the best leader and the best administrative manager of both the court and the judicial branch of government.
All right, final question. I've got so many, but we've run out of time. Do you think that we need to, given experiences, rethink the way that a Chief Justice is appointed to take away the power from the President? Because if we've got the wrong guy in office, we could get the wrong results with severe consequences.
Yeah, it's another interesting question, one would need a lot longer, I suspect, to tease out and reflect upon. It's a profound question, and it's interesting that the Constitution gives the President such leeway. Unlike all other judicial appointments, where there is this very ornate, detailed process of appointments running through the JSC, here the President can pick anyone who is a suitably qualified lawyer, essentially, and after consultation with the leaders of political parties in the National Assembly, and after consultation with the JSC, and after, in legal terms, is a very weak form of consultation, essentially an advance notification. It's not in consultation, which means a joint decision. So the President can really pick whoever he likes. Of course, what Ramaphosa has done here is make sure that this is a decision, when he finally reaches it, that will have full legitimacy, because the process has gone through these 2 stages, the initial shortlisting, now the JSC this week. So whoever wins this race, whoever gets appointed by the President, I think will enjoy full legitimacy and support.
Yeah, because of this President, what if the next guy, but that's a question for another time, because we run out of time today, but it'll be interesting 4 days. Let's chat again soon after. Richard, thank you so much. Always good talking to you.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, that's law professor Richard Calland talking to us about the process which begins tomorrow of selecting a new Chief Justice.